Welcome to Community Matters. I am joined by Keith Berelowitz. Uh, did I say that correctly, Keith?
You got that? Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. 10 out of 10.
So good to meet you. He is the CEO of pRxEngage and a very prominent patient advocate leader. He is advocating for patients to be able to access clinical trials, and he has created a platform that worldwide finds an easier path for patients with rare or end-stage disease or other serious conditions to navigate the clinical trial nightmare for a lot of them. Keith is an angel, and we want to make sure that we give him the proper praise that he deserves. Keith, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you, Keith. And so tell us now, I know that you have a few important announcements to make about pRxEngage, the platform, and I
Mhm.
want to just give you a little bit of floor time here to talk about this very important platform.
Okay. I've worked in clinical research for over 20 years now, very much focused on the patient engagement pathway. But it wasn't until I became a patient, started to look at studies through a patient's eyes, that I realized that, things are not as straightforward as they could be. And one of those areas was how people find clinical trials. Never mind find them, know what a clinical trial is, understand that trial, and if they then are interested in a trial, how they navigate to the clinical sites to do that. So it was 2025 that we set out to develop a platform that met the needs of people rather than the industry. And I say people because the industry is full of people. It's research sites, community groups, biotech and pharma, but people with various conditions who are looking for those opportunities of hope. But we wanted to do this slightly differently. Rather than looking at clinical trials and do I fit the clinical trial, it's does the clinical trial fit me? Both are equally important. And so we look at the medical suitability, but we also look at how this fits. Fast forward now to January of this year. The platform version 1 went live after several months in beta. And very quickly, we've had biotech and pharma sponsors onboard their studies onto the platform. These range from rare bleeding disorders like von Willebrand's disease to cancers like acute myeloid leukemia. So we're actually very proud that study goes live now. In that study, we're looking for a subset of patients with acute myeloid leukemia. In the US alone, this cancer affects about 80,000 people, but there is one form, those with a KMT2A mutation, that affects about 3% of the population. And we're working with sponsors, one in particular, where they've seen really good data. There was the ASH meeting, so this is a big meeting at the back end of last year, where they presented the data for that study, and patients in remission for an extended period of time with this drug was fantastic. So we were very excited to be asked to be part of this. So that's a big milestone. The study's been through IRB. It's approved. The use of our platform is approved, and it's an opportunity for people with AML to look at this. And it's not just people who have relapsed or those where the therapy is not working, so the refractory patients, but it's an opportunity for patients who are currently undergoing treatment to look at what is my next step if my current therapy doesn't work. And that's something people don't really think about. You just hope that your existing therapy will work. Unfortunately, in AML, there are a lot of cases where patients will relapse, and this therapy, and there are others out there, but this one particular therapy that we're working on is a good alternative and something for you as a patient or for a clinician to have in the back of their mind. So we're very happy to be working in this space. And then with von Willebrand's, again, working with an amazing Boston-based biotech company. just do things the right way. And that's an exciting study because it is also a global study that we will be helping patients in the US, but also in the UK and in Australia on that AML study. The study's being run in over 20 countries across the globe, 92 sites. So these are big and important studies. And what we're now hoping is that we will work on more and more. We've got studies in cardiology, scleroderma coming up, looking at pericarditis. It's been a really interesting time since we went live, and we've seen such great adoption from patients and guardians of people living with medical conditions. The feedback we've had is we just get what you're saying and what you're telling us, and you've made it nice and simple. So yeah, it's been a busy time, but it's very exciting.
Oh, I'm so excited. And I know that for you, this journey is personal. You got inspired by not just the theoretical notion that patient advocacy and clinical trials is a thing, but I know that you yourself went through it. Would you be able to share with us just a little about what inspires you to do this kind of work?
Sure. I mean, the origin is I lost my best friend at 11 to sickle cell disease, and that's a gazillion years ago now, 30 something years ago. And I'm very happy that the industry has moved on and we've innovated. But I was actually talking to a colleague about this yesterday. 5 years ago, patient advocacy was spoken about, but almost in the recesses of the room. It was the tokenism and so on. In the last 5 years, and I'd say it's really accelerated in the last 2, 3 years. You can't move without a patient advocacy conference going on or people speaking up, and I think it's really important. For too long, we've all towed the line. This is how we work. It's tick box and so on. I know I'm maybe a bit more outspoken than others, but that's not to be noticed. It's just these are my views. Like them, don't like them. But I do this so that hopefully other people will come forward and say, yes, this is not quite right. And we've seen a lot of people living with conditions, in particular rare disease, coming forward and saying, the status quo was not right. Things need to change. I wrote this week about a documentary I just watched, Matter of Time on Netflix. And this talks about one particular rare disease, epidermolysis bullosa, which affects children from birth, which is a genetic disease. Just looking at what advocacy has done there in a 10-year frame from almost nothing and families disjointed all over the world, they have gone from zero to a therapy on the market. There's no cure yet, but a therapy on the market within 10 years. And they're determined to have a therapy, a cure within 10 years. And that is through the power of advocacy. I mean, it's incredible what they do. And they're just one example. The PBC Foundation, based in Scotland, they've galvanized another rare condition in such a way, and that is through true advocacy. I could talk for hours about the various groups, and I'm not leaving anyone out. Apologies if I do. But the amazing thing is there is a movement now, and it's a real movement, not just a tokenism towards where we're going.
That's so true. And it takes leaders to build movements, and you definitely are one. And our condolences to you for your personal tragedy. And, it's inspiring to think about the progress you've made in 30 years out of what might have broken a lot of people. You built such a beautiful movement. And just like you talked about, the patient's voice, lots of clinicians will say, oh, yeah, I'm a patient advocate. Sure, I'm advocating for patients by doing my job. But but the true patient advocacy was the voice left in the back of the room, which was what are the barriers that people are living, and how can they overcome those barriers to access the real cures that may be available through trials, not the standard of care, because that is where the science is now. And you're right, is that they've come a long way thanks to you and thanks to others who are inspired by you. And I think you also made a good point is that, like a lot of these inherited conditions and diseases that are end stage and there's no definitive cure, or definitive cures are hard to access, clinical trials are the only way. And where do you go to find a clinical trial? And your average doctor is not going to know. They might say, well, go to grants.gov. So could you walk us through maybe what a typical journey might be like for a lot of the people that you have spoken with when it comes time to thinking about, do I need a clinical trial? What is that? And how do I do it?
Sure. So typically, and this was my personal experience. So the one thing I didn't speak about was I got a raised PSA. I had an MRI. It showed a black mark in the prostate, which was indicative of prostate cancer. I'll fast forward. It wasn't. It was prostatitis. But for that 3-month period where we were going from that MRI finding to the biopsy result, I was looking for clinical trials. Through no fault of his own, doctors are busy. My doctor didn't suggest, well, we could look at clinical trials if indeed this is the case. They just spoke about standard treatments. And that's fine. For a lot of people, that's exactly what they're going to do. But I think that clinical trials should be spoken about as an option at the same time of talking about standard of care, because there are so many amazing clinical trials going on. And just because a therapy is now licensed, a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, it was going through drug trials. So what do people do? What did I do? What did the research show when we were setting up our platform? The first place people go is to Dr. Google, and they type in clinical trials for whatever it happens to be. I would say maybe in the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen the advent of people now doing this through LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, whatever it happens to be, and asking, are there clinical trials for X, Y, and Z? And this will then typically send people to clinicaltrials.gov in the US or UK. There's Be Part of Research, which is a UK directory. In Europe, there's CETIS and the European directory and so on. These are all good and well, but the information, if you look at them, is very hard to digest if you do not work in our space. And that was one of the reasons why we set up the platform we did, is we wanted something that anyone could understand. We wanted something that someone could spend a few minutes on a page and be able to walk away and explain to their family, there's this clinical trial going on, this is what it's about, this is how long it takes, this is what I would be doing in the study. That elevator pitch kind of approach. That's not to dumb it down, because this is clearly not that consenting process, but it's that initial awareness piece. And then it was about making it relatable. I will say, because I'm a chair of an ethics committee first, there are many trial finder platforms out there. Some of them have got some really good qualities. Others are very specific for specific areas like oncology. But I think we've done something slightly different with our one. And in fact, we've given the platform its own name, which is pRx Trialport. So you'd go to trialport.com. And the reason we settled on this name is a clinical trial is a destination, and people, when they get a diagnosis, are looking for a destination, whether it's a standard of care treatment, it's a cure, it's another route forward. And we wanted to provide that destination, that safe harbor, somewhere where someone could go and comfortably browse clinical trials in a friendly way, and then have the agency for themselves to decide, is this right for me? Is it relatable? Do I understand what's going on? And then take themselves forward. And then we obviously help try and connect people. But the first place is typically lost in a sea of information. What I suggest to anyone is look at 3 or 4 different sources, speak to your doctor. If you know someone with the industry, speak to them. And I make the offer, because it seems to happen all the time, reach out to me. You can reach me on LinkedIn. I do find time to speak to as many people as I can. It may take me a couple of days, but I promise you I will reach out, and if I can give you any help, I will do.
Yeah. Yeah, I can attest to that personally. I know that you have reached out to people that I have referred you to, and you were immensely helpful in trying to help them navigate the clinical trial system. And more than that, you also were very reassuring uh, in your tone and your tenor, and it was something that speaks to the heart, and that's something that shows where your heart is. And so I definitely suggest if anybody is going through a tough time in their lives where they are faced with the question of clinical trials, that you do contact Keith. And I know he can help. Now, something you said there was really exciting, which was that the standard of care should include clinical trial discussions where clinical trials are. Now, you talk to a lot of physicians, and it is simply a matter of, oh, I keep up with the journals. Oh, I keep up with, whatever my organization, my medical association says. They send me emails every now and then. But being aware of clinical trials is, a lot of work. And it does open the door into the potential for technology to maybe provide that clinical decision support, incorporating clinical trials into it. Where are some of the more exciting areas that you see from a technological standpoint where technology could be applied to integrate clinical trial advocacy into the standard of care?
I'm going to say the two obvious two-letter word AI. I mean, AI has just absolutely blown the doors off this, and I think a lot of people are still scared uh, to use it because it's going to take over. It's going to take my job. My information will be out in the public domain. Used properly and used with human guardrails, it's 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 magical. And it's something that we have fully embraced within our organization, from the programming and the use of AI in how we build out the platform, to the use of AI in terms of improving our internal processes and our processes with the sponsors that we work with, so that things are streamlined, to the way in which we are presenting the information on screen using our prompts and LLMs. It's boundless. And for clinicians, I don't blame them. There are, just rare disease alone, there's over 10,000 conditions. You cannot know every single one of them, especially if you get this really spotty series of symptoms. In fact, I'm just writing a newsletter piece now, which I've titled "Rare Disease, It Starts with Weirdness." And that's how a lot of these things do start. So I think it would be wrong to turn to clinicians and say, well, you should know everything about every clinical trial, or you're a specialist in this area, so you should know all trials. Where technology plays a part is you can very quickly get to this information, whether it is through an LLM, whether it is through a platform like ours, where you can get a snapshot on the trial, or you can do a quick search. I mean, one of the things we've done within our platform is we've made it very easy to share the pages, either in print form or via email or message, in such a way that you can share it with your doctor, who may not have been aware of the trial that you are considering. There are other companies out there that are looking at this specifically from that clinician perspective to share information on trials. And I think that biotech and pharma do a good job of sharing information. But if you think about it, if we just look at industry-sponsored interventional trials, there's well over 16,000 new trials per year listed on clinicaltrials.gov. And that compounds year on year, because these trials don't nicely fall into a bucket of finishing in that year. So, if we look at AML, there's well over 300 ongoing trials. A clinician cannot know all of them. The thing I do say to clinicians is be open to listening. And, whether you're a patient or a guardian, or someone who has that information, share it with your clinician. expand their knowledge, and maybe they will go out and find information themselves in a different way. But I'd say AI is absolutely going to be at the center of bringing us all up to speed. We'll all be wearing glasses soon and just reading it off screens. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg.
So true. And another important point you mentioned there was about how physicians need to be open to listen. And one of the strange things about healthcare, maybe not that unexpected, is the resistance there is to doing things differently. If you're talking about clinical trials, the first thing you'll see, the physician goes, skepticism. Yeah, well, we have stuff that works. Okay, well, you can look into that. But one of the things that, of course, you see in healthcare a lot is that kind of monolithic resistance to any kind of advocacy movements, changes in the standard of care, trying things. Now, of course, when a patient gets to a certain point, physicians are like, okay, well, but there is that skepticism, hesitancy. And one thing I noticed is that healthcare is a worldwide thing. The same problems you have in the US, you have in England, you have in Europe, you got in Asia. And it's the experience of those afflictions is universal. And so whenever we look at how we can advocate, is also translating into policy. How do we ensure that incentives are aligned and that clinicians are actively, in the right place when it comes to incorporating clinical trials into the standard of care? In the US, of course, it's all driven by what they call reimbursements, as you know. And we have reimbursements for patient satisfaction as they navigate the health system. What are your thoughts on policy changes that could impact the way in which patients could access or find it easier to access clinical trials?
I actually think that the regulators are doing a pretty good job. We can always do better, but again, I think the key to this is the policy should be meet each other where you are. For patients and those living with conditions or caring for those, whether this be in their community group, go to them. Equally, if you want biotech and pharma to do something, go to them. And I don't physically mean go to them. Go to them in their thought process. Think about what is it that motivates them? What is going to resonate for whichever group it happens to be. So when you think about what policies should come out, I'm a big believer in principles versus rules. A rule is there to be broken. A principle is how you or what you attain to be. And so with these policies, and obviously you need a policy in place, there has to be that ability for people to talk to each other. And the biggest one, and something I've been discussing with the Health Research Authority here in the UK, is patient and public involvement in research. And that's in the co-design. And this is not co-design to tick another box. We showed this to a patient, they liked it, we all move on further. It has to be that meaningful engagement from all sides where a person living with a condition may say, this is not practical, I can't do this, but equally they need to acknowledge from the biotech and pharma perspective that some things are not necessarily easy to meld or shift around. Ultimately, a clinical trial is a scientific experiment. In a scientific experiment, you want as few variables as possible so that you can get a clear signal. But that's not explained properly to people. So the policy that for me would be most important would be one on communication and how you communicate with each other. But then maybe that's just a principle. But that's where I would go with this.
That's beautiful. Well, Keith, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to open the floor to you and give you the last word. If you have any parting messages for patients, families, scientists, clinicians, and others who want some direction on how we can be better patient advocates.
Okay, you put me on the spot here. I mean, for me, I think I've said it already. Don't play the blame game. when you point a finger, you're putting someone on the defensive, and therefore you're going to shut certain doors. Be open to exploring new opportunities. They may not be right, but you're not living the path of each person, and acknowledge each person has a different path, whether you're the clinician, someone working in biotech and pharma, someone living with or caring for someone with a medical condition. Ultimately, this is your journey, it's your choice. We all have to find a way to get there. And I think what was probably the most apt thing that I've heard this week was from a patient who said, I'm looking at these clinical trials as to how they can help other people in the future. But equally, if the drug that I'm currently on a trial for exists 4 or 5 years from now, I won't have to stay in hospital for extra days if I need to have an operation. So it's about how is this going to benefit you and others going forward. I think too often we look at just to the end of our nose, and we need to look a bit further.
Understood. I'll see past my nose. Got it. Keith Berelowitz, I want to give you our sincere thanks for being a leader in patient advocacy and for helping and saving so many patients who desperately need some form of hope. And we really appreciate you. I want to give a shout out to your organization, your family, and everyone else who is listening. Thank you so much, Keith, for joining us.
Thank you. And last thing, I appreciate you and everyone that does what they do to speak loud and proud.